9 minutes. That's all it took for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to unleash his judicial power on White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Treason charges. Threats of imprisonment. The entire nation watching live as he laid his trap. But Thomas never expected what happened next. When Leavitt pulled out a crumpled letter from her worn leather briefcase, the courtroom transformed. Jurors froze. Reporters stopped typing. And Thomas's hands, those steady hands that had signed countless rulings, began to tremble uncontrollably. What followed wasn't just a trial. It was the moment America witnessed raw truth demolish the walls of power. Before we dive deeper into this confrontation that shook Washington to its core, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest political showdowns that mainstream media won't fully cover. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. stood like a fortress that morning. Gray clouds hung low, casting shadows across marble columns as if nature itself sensed the gravity of what would unfold inside. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Senators adjusting their ties, reporters checking recorders, cameras positioned to capture every twitch, every word, every moment of what many believed would be the public execution of Karoline Leavitt's career. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House spokesperson in American history at just 27, faced treason charges for allegedly leaking classified information about Operation Iron Veil, a failed military mission that cost American soldiers their lives. The stakes couldn't be higher. Treason. The word itself carried the weight of prison cells and destroyed legacies. When Justice Clarence Thomas entered, his black robe billowed around him like an extension of his authority. His eyes, cold, calculating, scanned the room with the precision of a predator. Known for his traditional silence on the bench, today was different. Today Thomas would speak. Today he would decide Leavitt's fate. The gavel struck with a crack that silenced the room. The air grew stifling, heavy with the scent of power. This was no longer a courtroom, but an arena where truth and authority would clash in brutal combat. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and all eyes turned to witness Karoline Leavitt's entrance. She walked with measured steps, not rushed, not hesitant. Each footfall a declaration of intent. Her red dress, modest yet bold, contrasted sharply against the sea of navy suits and judicial black. But what struck everyone wasn't her appearance. It was what she lacked. No lawyer, no advisor, no support team trailing behind. Just Leavitt, alone, facing the full weight of the judicial system with nothing but a slightly worn leather briefcase clutched in her right hand. "She's insane coming alone," a young reporter whispered, hands trembling as he scribbled notes. A senator in the back row smirked, murmuring something about youthful arrogance destined for correction. Leavitt acknowledged no one. Her gaze locked directly onto Thomas, who sat motionless as stone. She placed her briefcase on the defendant's table, the click of its latches echoing through the now silent room. Her posture wasn't that of someone accused, but of someone ready for battle. Thomas struck his gavel again, the sharp sound slicing through the tension. "Karoline Leavitt," he began, his voice deep and resonant with decades of authority. "You stand before this court accused of actions that directly threaten national security. Evidence indicates you deliberately disclosed classified information regarding Operation Iron Veil, resulting in severe consequences. This constitutes treason. You will answer for these actions under oath." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. "Treason," someone muttered, the word part shock, part intrigue. Thomas raised his hand, demanding silence. The room obeyed instantly. "Specifically," he continued, voice sharpened like a blade, "you posted a message on the X platform, alluding to details about the death of soldier James Bennett during Operation Iron Veil. This action not only violated national security protocols, but potentially endangered ongoing operations." He leaned forward, gaze boring into Leavitt. "Do you understand the gravity of these accusations?" Leavitt's face betrayed nothing. No fear, no anxiety, no submission. She raised her head, meeting Thomas's stare directly. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Not broadly, barely perceptible, but enough to make a front-row reporter jot down in shock. "She's not afraid." "Judge Thomas," she replied, each word precisely delivered. "Before we proceed, I have one question. Have you read what's in this briefcase?" Her hand rested lightly on the leather case, fingers tracing its worn surface. The question hung in the air, not a threat but an invitation opening a door to something unknown. The courtroom froze. A juror, unconsciously leaned forward. A reporter forgot to press record, mouth slightly agape. Thomas appeared momentarily unbalanced, his eyebrows furrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it, as if realizing Leavitt's question wasn't as simple as it appeared. Leavitt didn't wait for his answer. She stepped forward. Just one step, but enough to make everyone feel its significance. "Let's begin," she said, her voice calm but cutting like a surgical instrument. "Because the truth doesn't wait." She opened the briefcase, the click sounding like a starting pistol. From it she withdrew a thin, crumpled sheet of paper with curled corners, as if it had been opened and folded hundreds of times. A faint coffee stain marked its bottom edge. A small tear had been patched with transparent tape. It wasn't a legal document or an official memo, just a letter. But the way she held it, gently cradling it with both hands like something infinitely precious, made the room feel its weight. "I am Laura Bennett," Leavitt began reading, her voice clear yet somehow intimate, as if sharing a confidence rather than presenting evidence. "I write this letter because I have no one left to beg." The courtroom fell silent. Even breathing seemed too loud. "My son, James Bennett, died in an operation they never named. They came to my house with a folded flag and 3 men in uniform. They called James a hero, but no one told me how he died." A woman in the audience, hands clasped tightly, began biting her lip, eyes glistening. "I asked why. They said classified. I begged to meet someone, anyone who knew what happened. They told me to go home, that national security mattered more than my pain. But every night, when I close James's bedroom door, I know they're hiding something." A juror, an older woman with a silk scarf around her neck, covered her mouth, shoulders trembling slightly. A reporter, who had been scribbling furiously moments before, stopped, eyes fixed on Leavitt. Leavitt paused, looked up, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces before her. "This isn't legal evidence," she said firmly. "This is the voice of a mother, stripped of the truth." She held up the letter, letting light from the window shine through it, highlighting its creases and stains. "This letter was sent to the White House press office where I work. I found it among thousands, but this was the only one that kept me awake at night. My superiors told me to destroy it, that it didn't matter. But I kept it, because James Bennett isn't just a number in a report. He was Laura Bennett's son, and he deserves to be remembered." The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The initial mockery, the smirks from spectators had vanished. A senator in the back row, who had shaken his head when Leavitt entered, now looked down, rubbing his forehead. A young reporter, eyes reddening, quickly wiped tears with her sleeve. If this story of power and accountability resonates with you, take a second to hit that like button. We need to send a message that Americans demand transparency from those in positions of authority. Thomas, still as a statue on the bench, showed signs of unease. His hand on the table tightened, knuckles whitening. He opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but then closed it, perhaps realizing any words now would ring hollow. Leavitt stepped away from the defendant's table, approaching the jury with the letter still in hand. She didn't raise it high, or make dramatic gestures. She simply held it, letting its existence speak volumes. "Laura Bennett doesn't want money or fame," she said, her voice deliberate. "She just wants to know how her son spent his final moments, what he said, what he felt. But the government, people in rooms like this, chose silence. They chose national security over a mother's heart." A small sob broke from the audience. A man wearing a military emblem on his cap bowed his head, shoulders shaking. The jury, originally maintaining professional neutrality, could no longer hide their emotions. The woman with the silk scarf dabbed her eyes. A man with salt and pepper hair clenched his fists, staring at the floor. Leavitt stood in the center of the courtroom, physically small but radiating the intensity of a flame that refused to be extinguished. She placed the letter gently on the table, as if laying down a sacred object. "We're here to discuss treason," she said, her voice stronger now. "But what is real treason? Seeking the truth or burying the voices of people like Laura Bennett? I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here so James Bennett and all the others like him can finally be heard." The courtroom had transformed. No longer a place of judgment, it had become a space where raw pain confronted power. The cameras, usually focused on capturing legal arguments, now zoomed in on Leavitt's face. Not the face of a defendant, but of someone carrying a torch through darkness. Thomas remained silent, but his icy gaze had changed. Something wavered in him, if only for a moment. Laura Bennett's letter, resting on the defendant's table, seemed to glow with significance, melting the court's cold formality with the heat of human suffering. But Leavitt wasn't finished. With deliberate movements, she returned to her briefcase. The room held its breath as she clicked it open once more. This time, she extracted a stack of documents, crisp white pages with sharp black text, stamped declassified in bold red at the corners. The cover read Operation Iron Veil, Internal Report, followed by numbers and codes only insiders would recognize. She placed these documents beside Laura's letter, her actions precise as a surgeon's. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the official stamp, signatures, and previously redacted lines now revealed. This is the official report on Operation Iron Veil, declassified just 7 days ago, she announced, eyes locked on the jury. It tells a very different story from what the government wants us to believe. On March 14th, James Bennett, age 24, was wounded in an ambush. This report states he remained alive for 38 minutes after being injured. She paused, allowing those words to sink in. 38 minutes. He was breathing. He had a pulse. But there was no defibrillator, no full medical team. Life-saving equipment had been diverted to a private military contractor. A soft groan rose from the audience. A juror, the man with the gray tie, clenched his fists tighter, eyes fixed on the documents. Leavitt turned to the next page, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. The report explicitly states, the patient showed signs of survival if timely intervention had occurred. No action was taken. Not an accident. Not battlefield chaos. This was a choice. Her words cut like a knife, causing a young reporter to drop her pen, the clatter echoing in the stunned silence. Thomas gripped the edge of his desk, his composure finally cracking. Miss Leavitt, these documents have not been properly verified in court. You are disrupting procedure. But Leavitt didn't turn to look at him. She continued, her voice unchanged. They've been declassified, Your Honor. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist. The statement made several spectators gasp, as if witnessing a direct blow to authority itself. Thomas frowned but said nothing more, perhaps realizing he was losing control of his own courtroom. With a slight nod toward the side door, Leavitt signaled. The door opened, and a woman entered, Laura Bennett, James's mother. Short in stature with gray hair neatly tied back, she wore a dark green coat and held a small framed photograph. She walked slowly but steadily, like someone well acquainted with pain, but never defeated by it. The crowd watched in reverent silence. Laura stopped near the witness stand, her eyes finding Thomas, not with hatred but with profound sadness, as if seeing through his judicial facade to something broken beneath. Think about it. What would you do if you were Laura Bennett? Would you quietly accept the national security excuse, or would you demand the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I am Laura Bennett, she said, raising the framed photo. James in his military uniform, smiling brightly beside an old car. This is my son. He wanted to be a pilot, to soar higher than my dreams could follow. But 2 years ago, they brought him back in a coffin, and no one would tell me why. She paused, taking a breath, her gaze never leaving Thomas. They told me James died for his country, but now I know he died because people like you chose profit over lives. The courtroom seemed drained of oxygen. A young female juror covered her mouth, eyes reddening. A veteran in the back row wearing a medal bowed his head, shoulders trembling. Laura raised the photo higher, her voice growing stronger as if speaking for every parent who had ever lost a child. I don't need your apologies. I need the truth. James isn't a statistic in your reports. He was my son, and he deserved to be saved. Leavitt stood beside her, silent, letting Laura's words echo through the chamber. She didn't intervene or add anything, but her gaze swept the courtroom like fire. The camera shifted from Laura's face to Thomas. He sat motionless, but his hands, once steady, now trembled visibly on the desk. Do you have children, Your Honor? Laura asked, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Do you know what it's like to lose a piece of yourself and never know why? The question hung in the air, requiring no answer, yet piercing the heart of everyone present. Thomas didn't respond, his gaze dropping for the first time during the trial. Leavitt stepped forward again, gently placing a hand on Laura's shoulder in silent support. She turned to address the jury, her voice sharper but still controlled. These documents and Mrs. Bennett's words aren't presented to convict anyone today. They exist to remind us that the truth cannot be buried forever. James Bennett was abandoned, and those who authorize that decision still sit in positions of power. The courtroom had become a pressure cooker of emotion. Laura Bennett's testimony had transformed the space from a legal proceeding into something approaching sacred ground. But Leavitt still wasn't finished. She returned to her briefcase once more, this time retrieving a small black USB drive that gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights. "This," she said, her voice calm but cutting like a freshly honed blade, "is what those in power desperately hope you'll never hear." She handed the USB to a court officer who hesitated before plugging it into the audio system. The crowd shifted nervously, a reporter whispering, "What could she possibly have?" Before the audio played, Leavitt signaled toward the side door again. It opened to reveal a woman around 40 with short brown hair, wearing a simple white coat. Drive. Rachel Collins, her eyes betraying countless sleepless nights. She walked as if carrying an invisible weight, each step heavy with memory. "I am Dr. Rachel Collins, a military doctor," she began, her voice strained as if each word required excavation from deep within. "2 years ago, I served at a medical station where James Bennett was brought after the ambush." She paused, her gaze fixed on some distant point, as if reliving that moment in real time. "He was badly wounded but alive. I saw his chest rise and fall, heard his faint breathing. He gripped my hand and whispered, 'Tell my mom not to worry. I promised to save him.'" The courtroom fell into profound silence. A spectator, the man in the veteran's cap, covered his eyes with one hand. "But I had no equipment. No defibrillator, no sufficient blood-clotting drugs. I begged my superiors for support, but they said, 'This is classified, no intervention.' I watched James slip away right in front of me, and I could do nothing." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the microphone. "He didn't die because of enemy fire. He died because we abandoned him." A sob broke from the audience. A juror turned away, shoulders shaking. The cameras captured Rachel's face, her eyes red-rimmed but tearless, as if she had long ago cried herself dry. Leavitt stood nearby, allowing Rachel's testimony to sweep through the room like an Arctic wind. Thomas gripped his gavel tightly, lips pressed into a thin line, but his eyes had lost their certainty. Rachel looked directly at Thomas, her voice finding new strength in her pain. "I've lived with that memory every day. I see James in my dreams, hear him calling for his mother. I'm not here seeking forgiveness but to declare that the truth cannot remain buried." She set the microphone down and stepped away, but her accusatory gaze remained fixed on Thomas. Leavitt moved forward, taking the microphone. "Dr. Collins's words don't stand alone," she said. She nodded to the court officer, and the courtroom speakers crackled to life. Then a voice emerged, low, cold, unmistakable. "If his mother digs too deep, let her get lost in paperwork. This can't get out." Clarence Thomas's voice, captured in a secret recording. The courtroom seemed to empty of air. A reporter dropped her recorder, the clatter echoing loudly. A female juror gasped, eyes wide with shock. Leavitt didn't hesitate. She pulled an iPhone from her pocket, fingers swiping quickly across its screen. "I've just posted this recording on X," she announced, her voice calm but defiant. "The entire world is listening right now." The cameras zoomed in on her phone screen, showing thousands of shares accumulating in real time. The audience buzzed with disbelief, someone shouting, "She actually did it!" Thomas slammed his gavel, his voice thundering through the chaos. "Miss Leavitt, you are violating court protocols!" But his gavel's sound drowned beneath the growing whispers from the spectators. Leavitt turned to face him directly, her gaze no longer that of a defendant but of an accuser wielding truth like a weapon. "Protocols?" she asked, her voice quiet but cutting. "What protocols allowed you to hide James Bennett's death? What protocols protect those who choose profit over lives?" She held up the USB drive like a sword. "This isn't rumor or speculation. This is your voice ordering the burial of a mother's grief, a family's closure, a soldier's truth." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters typed frantically. Phones lit up across the gallery as spectators shared what they were witnessing. A juror, the man with salt and pepper hair, looked at Thomas with eyes no longer respectful, but deeply disappointed. Thomas sat frozen, hands still gripping the gavel but not striking it again. His face, previously impassive as stone, now showed cracks, Not fear exactly, but the dawning realization he had lost control, not just of his courtroom, but of the narrative he had constructed. We've all witnessed moments when power is challenged, when the mighty face accountability. How does this case make you feel about our justice system? Hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. But Karoline Leavitt, standing small in her red dress amid the chaos, wasn't finished. She walked to a corner of the courtroom, where a simple, overlooked object stood, an old wooden chair, its legs scarred, its seat worn smooth by years of use. It didn't belong in the formal setting of the court, lacking the majesty of judicial furniture. It was clearly a piece from an ordinary home, where family meals had once taken place. Leavitt pulled this chair to the center of the room, placing it before the jury. The wood scraped against the floor with a creak, small but enough to draw every eye. She stood beside it, hand resting lightly on its back, fingers tracing the scratches as if reading some invisible history. "This," she began, her voice soft but clear as a bell in still air, "is James Bennett's chair. He sat here in his mother's kitchen every morning before enlisting. He ate toast, talked about his dreams of becoming a pilot, promised to fix the old car in the yard." She paused, her gaze sweeping the jury. "Now this chair is empty, and it will remain empty forever." The courtroom fell silent again, not from fear but from reverence. A juror, the woman with curly hair, bowed her head, hands covering her face. The veteran in the cap stared at the floor, as if confronting his own memories. The cameras panned slowly, capturing the chair, simple, ordinary, yet now charged with meaning, as if containing the ghost of someone lost. Leavitt signaled to the side door once more. It opened to admit a young girl, Emma Bennett, 12 years old, wearing a pale green sweater, her hair in a neat ponytail. She was small, but walked with determination, clutching something tightly in her hands. The crowd watched, hardly breathing. Emma stopped beside the chair, her eyes scanning the courtroom, before settling on the empty seat. She didn't cry, but her lips pressed together tightly, as if holding back a storm of emotion. Leavitt knelt down to Emma's level and handed her the microphone. The girl's voice, when she spoke, was soft but astonishingly clear. "James was my brother," she said, opening her hand to reveal an old military medal, its ribbon frayed, its metal scratched from handling. "He promised to teach me to drive when I got older. He said he'd take me everywhere, as long as I studied hard." Emma paused, her gaze fixed on the empty chair. "But he didn't come back, and no one told me why." The courtroom seemed to collapse inward with collective grief. A reporter stopped typing, eyes reddening. A juror turned away, shoulders visibly trembling. Emma raised the medal, her small hand shaking slightly. "I kept this in a box under my bed. I thought if I held on to it, James would be proud. But I want Miss Leavitt to have it, because she told the truth about him when no one else would." She handed the medal to Leavitt, the movement slow and ceremonial, as if giving away a piece of her heart. Leavitt accepted it, her hands trembling for the first time during the trial, eyes glistening with tears she made no attempt to hide or wipe away. She held the medal in both hands, as if it were made of glass, then stood to address the jury. "Emma Bennett isn't here to accuse," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "She's here to remind us that James Bennett wasn't just a name in a classified report. He was a brother, a son, a family's hope. And he was taken not by war but by decisions made in darkened rooms by people who never have to face the consequences." The courtroom remained silent. No typing, no whispers. The camera focused on Leavitt's face, then shifted to Emma standing beside the empty chair, hands clasped tightly before her. Thomas gripped his gavel but didn't strike it. His eyes, once cold and certain, now seemed lost, as if confronting an undeniable truth he'd long avoided. Leavitt placed the medal beside the chair, her movement gentle as placing flowers on a grave. "This chair isn't evidence," she said, her voice resonating through the silent room. "It's a reminder that every decision made in this courthouse, in the halls of power, leaves an empty space somewhere. We can't give James back to Emma, but we can give her the truth." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the courtroom one final time, not in challenge but in silent invitation to reflection. The trial ended abruptly. Thomas stood, his black robe askew, and signaled to the court officer without speaking a word. No verdict was announced, no formal conclusion reached. The crowd buzzed with confusion as Leavitt calmly packed her briefcase, her expression serene, like someone who had completed a sacred mission. As she left the courtroom, the heavy wooden door closed behind her with a creak that seemed to mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. Just hours later, news exploded across media platforms. A terse statement from the Supreme Court's office, transmitted via email and posted on its official website, announced Justice Clarence Thomas's immediate resignation. No explanation was provided, no comment offered, no press conference scheduled, just a dry administrative line, as if he wished to vanish from public consciousness. On social media, the story spread with unprecedented speed. "Thomas resigns," one account posted alongside a photo of the empty wooden chair. "Leavitt did it," another declared, garnering thousands of shares within minutes. The mainstream press scrambled to analyze what many were calling the most significant judicial downfall in modern American history, with headlines ranging from "27-year-old woman defeats Supreme Court justice" to "The empty chair that changed America." If you believe in the power of truth to reshape even our highest institutions, hit that subscribe button now. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you the stories of courage that mainstream media often glosses over. Leavitt descended the courthouse's cold stone steps into a waiting crowd, not dozens but hundreds. From mothers clutching photos of sons in uniform to veterans wearing silver medals on weathered jackets, they formed a silent corridor for her passage. They didn't cheer or wave banners. They stood in respectful silence, bearing witness. An elderly woman holding a black and white photograph whispered, "Thank you," as Leavitt passed. A young boy held up a handwritten sign, "James is not forgotten." Leavitt didn't stop or wave. She nodded once, still clutching Laura Bennett's letter and Emma's medal, as if they were precious artifacts entrusted to her care. Inside her car, sheltered from the flashing lights of press cameras, she opened her phone and scrolled through X. A prominent post from an anonymous account showed the image of the wooden chair with the caption "The Forgotten." Below it, hundreds of comments listed names: soldiers, brothers, sons, daughters, those lost and never properly accounted for. Leavitt shared the post, then launched a new page, an online memorial where families could post stories of loved ones, from James Bennett to names never before spoken in public. Within hours, the site drew thousands of visitors, becoming a digital monument where truth found sanctuary. Looking out the window at the crowd still standing in silent vigil, Leavitt's expression softened but remained resolute. She had risked everything: career, reputation, personal safety, to bring truth into the light. The crowd understood, as she did, that justice wasn't found in court rulings but in the moment when the forgotten are finally named and remembered. Months later, Karoline Leavitt sat on the wooden porch of a New Hampshire farmhouse, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across fields of swaying grass. No red dress or camera lights surrounded her now. She wore a simple green sweater, her hair loose in the gentle breeze. Beside her, her infant son lay sleeping in a bassinet, his peaceful breathing a counterpoint to the turbulence she'd navigated in Washington. In her hands, she still held Laura Bennett's letter and Emma's medal, not as burdens, but as reminders of promises kept. Tucked inside the folded letter was a newer note, its trembling handwriting signed by Laura Bennett. "Karoline, you gave James a voice when the powerful would not. I have nothing to offer but this gratitude." Leavitt smiled, not in triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found light in darkness. She looked at her sleeping son, reaching to brush his hair gently. "All of this," she whispered, "was so you could grow up in a world where truth isn't buried." Her phone lit up with a notification from the online memorial she'd created. Thousands of stories had been posted. Mothers telling of sons, siblings recalling sisters, veterans writing of comrades. One post from a woman named Clara included a photo of a young man in uniform. "My son David died in 2019. Now I know I'm not alone. Thank you, Karoline." Leavitt shared the post, her eyes glistening but her tears unshed. These stories were a fire that would continue burning, illuminating dark corners of power that had too long remained shadowed. Standing at the porch's edge, holding the letter and medal, she breathed deeply of the country air. In her mind, she saw James Bennett, Emma, Laura, and countless others she'd never meet, but who had become part of her journey. She thought of Thomas, who had left the bench in silence, creating not a void of failure, but a space where truth might finally flourish. She thought of herself, once deemed too young, too idealistic to challenge an entrenched system, who had made that very system listen, if only for a moment. Leavitt returned inside, placing the letter and medal on a wooden shelf beside family photos, not as trophies, but as reminders that truth, however painful its birth, was always worth fighting for. The story of Karoline Leavitt and her confrontation with Justice Thomas reflects profound issues in American society today. The opacity of power systems, the forgotten pain of military families, and the potential of younger generations to demand accountability. Laura Bennett's letter, James's empty chair, and Emma's medal serve as powerful symbols reminding us that behind every policy decision, behind every classified operation, real human lives hang in the balance. Every life deserves acknowledgement, every family deserves answers. Leavitt's act of posting the recording on social media, launching an online memorial, and its viral spread demonstrate how technology can amplify truth in ways previously impossible, reflecting how movements like Black Lives Matter have harnessed digital platforms to drive social change. Yet Thomas's quiet resignation also warns that power often evades true accountability, a problem still endemic in American institutions. The system may bend, but does it truly break? Does it genuinely reform? The lesson remains clear. One person, armed with nothing but truth and the courage to speak it, can create ripples that become waves. Everyone, regardless of age or position, can affect change through persistent commitment to revealing what others wish to hide. Learn from Leavitt. Don't fear standing alone when truth stands with you. Use platforms available to you to connect the stories of those left behind. Learn from Emma that even small gestures, like giving away a treasured medal, can inspire monumental shifts in understanding. In your own life, listen to the Laura Bennetts around you, colleagues, neighbors, strangers, and support them in telling their stories. Justice begins not with grand gestures, but with small acts of courage, with refusing to remain silent when silence serves only those already in power. If this story touched you, please hit subscribe and join our community dedicated to exposing truth and demanding accountability. Your support helps us continue bringing these essential stories to light. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in the next video as we continue exploring the voices that power tries to silence, but truth refuses to forget.